Imagine you're me. You've seen an advert for a new film described as the feminist masterpiece everyone has been dying to see. You're pretty excited. You buy a cinema ticket, the lights go out, and you're then subject to what I can only describe as the feminist film version of A Catfish, a watered-down movie about feminist issues with dodgy messaging, all washed down with a poppy soundtrack. You want to like it, but you feel unsatisfied and disappointed. You've had drunken conversations with your friends about these issues that were deeper than this, and you find yourself asking, what the hell was that? In 2018, the Time's Up movement was started as a way of exposing the countless cases of sexual assault and harassment in Hollywood. Soon after, the New York Times published an exposé on Harvey Weinstein, leading to many more people speaking up about abuse in the film industry. Around the same time, there was a rise in demand for more well-written female characters and stories about women in film. This led to what is often referred to as the post-Me Too era. And for a while, it felt like maybe the industry was changing. More people were coming forward with their experiences, and it felt like Hollywood was paying more attention to women's stories. That was until I saw this film, and this film, and this series, and also this film. Each of these films felt like I'd been lured into watching something under the guise of exploring feminist issues, but then didn't. Because while it's great to share women's stories and have better female characters in film, it really matters who shares these stories and the people behind the film. And here's the thing, having a female lead doesn't make it a feminist movie, having a female lead doesn't mean it's a well-written character, and having more movies directed by men about women disguised under the bracket of being a feminist movie also doesn't make it a feminist film. So, surprise surprise, having more poorly written characters explain a watered-down, palatable version of feminism does absolutely nothing and doesn't fix any of Hollywood's problems. This wave of performative feminism has created films that contain tropes that are just as harmful, none of which reverse any of the damage done by the film industry. So how does this help us? How can we be better? In this essay, I'll look at Hollywood's attempt to erase their own messy history through performative and reductionist feminism in film, what exactly is expected of women in film, and whether we've really made any progress at all.
The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences presents P is for the pain far away. She makes me feel Sunday. P is for you turn me out. The appetizing eye.
A phrase you'll hear a lot in this section is the term girlboss. Before we start, I'll do a quick breakdown / comprehensive guide of what this term really means. CEO of Nasty Gal coined this term in her book Girlboss, which was released in 2014. This initially was defined as women using systems of male power in the workplace in order to become successful. The girl boss doesn't care about being perceived as a bitch because it doesn't matter, as long as you can climb your way to the top. You might be thinking, okay, cool, this sounds good, this sounds empowering and like a good way to deal with misogyny in the workplace. Because, surprise surprise, most of these practices were taken from toxic masculinity and more specifically, the way some men choose to deal with their emotional problems. The way I see it, girl boss culture then became this idea of, okay, men can sometimes behave like shit, why don't we just do the same and use the same methods to achieve power? And to this I roll my eyes and say, behaving like men is really not the answer to our problems. However, this new wave of girl boss feminism started seeping into films, leading to some pretty harmful reoccurring ideas about what it means to be a woman, the idea of justice, and how to deal with the system in general. 3 films that I think encapsulate all the problems within this new genre are Bombshell, Promising Young Woman, and of course, Blonde. When making a movie about sexual assault or harassment, who are you making it for? Are you making it to educate men? Are you making it for women so they feel seen? Is Hollywood just doing it as lip service to say that they're trying? Or is it for all of the above? In Bombshell, it was hard to see exactly which audience the film was trying to appeal to. It wasn't for left-wing people because all the politics was very right-wing, and the characters we were supposed to sympathise with were often making racist comments. It wasn't for people of colour because it was entirely about 3 white women who again were often making racist comments, and it wasn't for men, but it often felt like a what not to do educational video. The film isolated any of its potential audiences by having no characters to connect to. Liberals won't like it because of the politics, women won't like it because the characters are unlikable, and men won't like it because it feels like a lesson. So whose side are we supposed to be on? I think a lot of the films in this genre fall into this trap simply because they're trying to speak to too many people. Maybe because executives don't want to appeal to a specific audience and push other people away. But given how many movies are made for male audiences, this shouldn't be an issue. I was initially quite surprised by the direction Promising Young Woman took. The movie was marketed as a rape revenge story, but the main character isn't seeking justice for herself, but for her friend. It had a let's use violence to solve violence message by showing the main character, Cassie, being unable to move on and deal with her trauma and instead kind of pranking violent men. I was unconvinced by what exactly it was trying to say. that sexual assault is awful and ruins people's lives, because we already know that. Weirdly, Cassie trusts the police enough to ensure that her abuser will go to jail, which also goes against the whole "the system is fucked" messaging that we see earlier on. And what does it say to victims moving forward? That there is no hope for a better life? That you can't heal and should aim to avenge a system that will always fail us? Again, this feels very much like girlboss feminism, aka toxic masculinity mixed with feminism. One of the key lessons I took away from this film was that if you want justice, you should just die, which perfectly adds on to my last point of the film not knowing what it's trying to say, or trying to say too much. If you're going to make a fun fantasy type film about avenging rapists, why not just end the film with her killing the rapist? It's supposed to be a fantasy, right? But instead, we're supposed to be like, oh, she got him, she's dead, that'll teach him. Maybe the director is trying to make a point by having a catharsis that we can't enjoy, showing that our concept of justice is pretty hollow and that's the only type of justice we can achieve. But is that really something we want to be promoting? Can we not aspire for more? I guess next time something awful happens to me, I'll just die. Another idea that has been reiterated through these films is the idea that justice can be equated to money. In Bombshell, it's seen as a celebratory thing that they are essentially given hush money. Empowerment should not be equated with silence. There is nothing rebellious or empowering about being paid to not talk. We should aim for justice that is deeper than what's in our pockets. Whenever a film does this, it falls short, because then it becomes clear that you don't care about entertaining your audience, you care more about sharing a message, and no one wants to feel like they're being spoon-fed political ideas, even if they're valid and important. Many of the films in this genre feel like a bunch of Hollywood executives were sitting around a table going, we need to make something about women and sexual assault, let's make a film about that. In my opinion, that is not how films should be made. Stories should always come first. Promising Young Women or Bombshell don't do this. In fact, I think they do the opposite and show sexual assault in a smart and sensitive way. Unfortunately, there are countless other movies that do not do this, with exploitative and sexualized portrayals of abuse, such as in Blonde, where it is done to appeal to the male gaze and these sick and twisted fantasies of power and domination. We also see this in shows like Pam and Tommy and the Jeffrey Dahmer docuseries. What can I say? It's been a great year for violent men, not a great year for women. Yeah, this is a grey area that's a bit confusing. It feels like that line in Before Sunrise where Celine worries that feminism was invented by men as a way of encouraging women to feel sexually liberated and sleep with more people. Is it empowering, or is it sexualization? I feel like with some male directors, they say it's empowering as a way of getting away with sexualizing the female characters. Like in Euphoria, they're teenage girls that are always half naked. That's just objectification. I get it. Anyway, it's a grey area, but I worry that too many male directors are falling into this trap and selling it as a feminist film or whatever when they're just being creepy. What's empowering or not should be on the terms of the person doing the said empowering thing. How could the director know whether the half-naked actress on set feels empowered? Maybe she does, but maybe she feels uncomfortable. It's not up to them to decide. People really hated She-Hulk. And while I don't think the show deserves the hate it got, I do have an issue with people writing women into already existing male characters. Can we just have new characters to play and write more interesting roles instead of going, let's just turn this character into a woman? I don't know, it feels kind of lazy to me. Bam bam bam, ba-dam bam. The perfect victim is a trope in film where someone is portrayed as only being worthy of help and sympathy about their abuse when they respond to it passively, aka without fighting back or defending themselves. In Blonde, Marilyn Monroe is only pitied because she gives into the system that works to control and silence her. She's painted as this poor helpless creature who's submissive and unable to help herself. This creates a really fucked up idea of how women should respond to abuse and predatory behaviour, that we aren't allowed to defend ourselves because if we do, we're put on an equal level with the abuser. We must be silent to achieve justice, because everyone loves a damsel in distress. A while back, someone told me that they didn't want to watch Black Widow because they'd heard it was too political. Same with The Rings of Power. Someone I know talked about how there was a female leader and scathingly said, which is very popular these days. And I'm torn because part of me understands why people don't like this, but also it feels like a double-edged sword. What exactly counts as an authentic performance? And why do people get so mad about women in lead roles? I don't think Scarlett Johansson's presence as Black Widow is political because there shouldn't be anything political about her playing a character she's played for years in a solo movie. But if the film was made to tick a box and do a bit of the old lip service, then I can see why people wouldn't like it. Because then, relating back to my other point, it's about telling a story for the sake of sharing a political message rather than telling a story because you love it and think it's great. And there are some parts where you go, okay, this was clearly written for them to tick a box and go, cool, we discussed some women's issues, let's get back to fighting spiders or whatever. Like the part where they talk about not having periods and then David Harbour's character makes a joke about it, and I'm like, that didn't feel authentic to the story. It doesn't feel authentic to the Marvel Universe, which has never concerned itself with these ideas before this point. So it's interesting that now they mention periods. But when's a good time to mention periods? How can you be authentic without awkwardly politicizing something? It feels like people are angry and unsatisfied either way. They're either mad that there are no women, or they see a woman and go, oh, that's so political. So what do? I think what people are picking up on is when there's an inauthentic story. If you have women in authentic stories with honest storytelling driven by character and not theme, then you're golden. People love that. But if it feels like it was motivated by theme, or they're adding in a subplot or line that doesn't fit with the rest of the story, then it was probably forced in by some Hollywood executive who wanted a PMS narrative in a Marvel movie so he could tick the box of saying, yes, we care about women.
Yes, we care about women.
I also think that you can't explore these nuanced ideas by using the formulaic storytelling that Marvel is known for. You can't just plug some feminist ideology into a comic book movie, because that's not what the formula works for. One thing that was cool about this though was I saw it with my little sister in the cinema, but seeing how excited she was about seeing this film made me really happy. And there were other girls in the cinema that cheered when they saw the title card, and that was really cute, so I get some bonus points for that. Bam bam bam, ba-dam bam. Ultimately, the problems we're seeing in these films work to undermine and silence women. There's a mismatch between the ideas we see on screen and how they translate in real life, and the ideas we see in film aren't always helpful, diluting the message at hand and telling it through the perspective of people who don't care or understand, ultimately catering it to the comfort of male audience members. Men are praised for doing the bare minimum. Using the word feminism is enough to be seen as a good person, but it's not. Who shares and writes these stories matter, and if these ideas can't translate to real-world actions and thoughts, it's not good enough. So, what does this all boil down to? Where does this lead us? Director of Bombshell Jay Roach had previously directed Meet the Parents, The Spy Who Shagged Me, and Austin Powers. What led producers to think he was the right person to tell this story? The Me Too movement and demand for these experiences in film has been commercialised and exploited by Hollywood, used to advance the careers of male directors under the guise of being feminist films. Female pain and trauma has been invalidated and exploited through the way these stories have been told, relying on the male perspective to talk about things they don't understand. At its core, Hollywood cares more about profit, lip service, and furthering men's careers than they do about women's stories. Look at Blonde. He presented a real person as an object, with no care or thought to the person behind the fame. He turned her experiences into a spectacle. And adding to that, he even admitted that he fabricated most of the story elements and they weren't based on her real life. Which begs the question, if you're going to make up a story in order to talk about a specific theme, why not make up a new character? Why use a real person as a plot device? This shows the absolute lack of respect for female stories. He even said in this interview, I'm actually in shock at how ignorant and stupid this is, because any woman knows how all of these situations are directly linked to misogyny, yet this guy has no understanding and doesn't have the experiences to see how these are correlated. And this is pretty basic shit. This Letterboxd review imagines quite well what the script is like. Men are making films about women to advance their own careers by saying it's a female-driven story, but why does that give them the right to tell it? And the thing is, when we talk about feminist issues, we're expected to defend ourselves and say, I'm not talking about all men, and clarify that men are also sexually assaulted, etc. Which is true, but I'm tired of having to link back every feminist issue to men and tailor it to their comfort around us discussing an issue. We've been doing that for so long that we can't even have films about female experiences directed or written by women. The number of times I've had discussions with guy friends about feminism, and they equate the issues with their struggle to be vulnerable because of toxic masculinity, and I'm like, yes, feminism was also solve these issues, but they aren't the same. Or if I talk about feminist issues and some guy jokingly says, oh, I bet you hate all men. No, I don't, but I like you a lot less now. Because when we're expected to justify our beliefs by saying we don't hate men and we're good feminists, all it does is shut down the conversation and make it about men's perceived victimhood instead of challenging the patriarchy. Yet when men say they're feminists, they're congratulated and can do the bare minimum and will be deemed as one of the good guys. And what annoys me even more is when people equate hating with holding someone accountable. We hate male violence, not men. Sorry for ranting, I got kind of upset. The emptiness of this current philosophy doesn't lead to any real-world progress because the changes they're making are motivated by the wrong reasons. And the thing is, there have been some great groundbreaking films and TV shows that explore these experiences well, which we'll get into later, but for the most part it feels very performative and shaky. We now have the language within popular culture to have a vague grasp of these ideas and how to articulate them, but none of the foundations are there. The whole thing is like trying to build a house on a beach, unstable and ready to fall down at any minute. It's easy to learn the basics and appear like a good moral person, but in practice it's so flimsy that it can be completely dismantled at any time. At parties, at work, when girls tell their guy friends about fucked up stuff that's happened to them. When I think about it, it's kind of scary how easy it is for guys to use feminism to manipulate women into thinking they care. I've had so many conversations with guys where I'm like, oh, they care about women, and then they do something really messed up and I'm like, and it's the same in film. There are these superficial feminist stories, but when it comes to real life situations, these ideas aren't put into practice, showing how hollow it was in the first place. Let me give a few real-world examples. The idea of the perfect victim in film tells us that only certain people are deserving of justice. More people are realising that we need to believe women when they come forward about abuse or harassment. But if we look at the Amber Heard trial, people didn't believe her because they liked the movies Johnny Depp was in, or they thought he seemed like a nice guy. But here's a crazy thought, maybe she was telling the truth. People don't know these celebrities, yet they defend them as if they do, because after all, he's so great at playing a pirate. Whenever she exhibited any neurotic behaviour, it was held against her, yet he admitted to doing crazy things that people didn't bat an eyelid at. Amber Heard didn't fit the mould for the perfect victim, and because of this, she was obliterated by the public. Obviously, we can't know what happened, but no one deserves to be treated how she was. Not even Harvey Weinstein was treated that badly. I also think people need to remember that defending yourself against an abuser doesn't make you an abuser. As a result of this trial, women are being openly mocked and laughed at when they come forward about sexual assault. People in the comments of this are encouraging this and calling her Amber Heard. Men are using the idea of a defamation trial to silence anyone that speaks out. And the thing is, they've been waiting for something like this to happen, a reason to invalidate every victim's experience and the female struggle. They leapt at the chance to disprove anybody that comes forward, an anecdote they can use in their arguments to dismiss us. And here's the thing, it takes an immense amount of courage to speak up about abuse and harassment, and it isn't something you choose to do lightly. When you speak up, you have everything to lose, but when abusers try to defend themselves, they have nothing to lose, because they've seemingly already lost everything. What's the harm in a trial to try and defend your reputation and career? But in the case of this trial and countless others, we can see that people ultimately don't care what he did, because bottom line is, they don't want to believe women, and men can always bounce back from abuse. The margins for believing survivors are so narrow, it's like those password requirements that are impossible to fulfill. And so the same cycle is repeated, over and over again. So it leaves us with this question, what does justice look like in a world that diminishes survivors? Is justice obsolete? By now you might be depressed. I'm depressed. I've been editing this video for 6 weeks. I'm absolutely traumatized.
I'm ready to get the fuck ASAP.
Therapy.
But amongst all the doom and gloom, it's important to discuss what we can do better and more importantly, who's been doing it well. I've made a letterbox list of great woman-centered stories, so you can look at that if you want. For anyone who hasn't seen Unbelievable, please watch it. It's so incredible. It's a really tough watch, but I think it has a lot of hope in it and great examples of how we can improve the current systems we have in place. We see the work of these two female detectives as they try to catch a serial rapist, and there's such a difference between the way the victim is treated by the male detectives and by the women who lead her case. It's such a brilliant example of how these cases could be handled and how difficult it is to be heard and taken seriously. I love St. Francis, it's really funny and just a well-written hidden gem of a film. Also, I don't think I've ever seen someone have a period on screen before seeing this, which is kind of wild. Mike Mills is one of my favourite writers and 20th Century Woman is just great. Annette Bening's character in this might be one of my favourite characters ever. I feel like if my love life carries on as it is, then I'll probably end up like her character one day. Plus, the menstruation scene is maybe the best thing ever.
Menstruation.
Just keep eye contact with me. Who are you looking at? Menstruation.
Menstruation.
Now, the morning show is an interesting one because it's the first show I've seen about the Me Too movement that isn't driven by providing answers or educating people, but by posing questions. And I think that's really smart because there are all these tricky, nuanced situations that we don't necessarily know the answers to, but it sparks a conversation because there's so much to think about. And I love that. Sometimes the most effective way of exploring something is by saying, here's some information, why don't you think about this for a while? After all this, you might be thinking, okay, there are lots of problems in the genre when the wrong people say the wrong things about these issues. So how do non-diverse people tell diverse stories? What can we do better? Say you're a male director presented with a script about the female experience. Ask yourself this: am I the right person to tell this story? Do I have experiences I can draw on that help me understand the feelings of this character? Is there someone better suited to tell this? Now double check what your motivations are. Are you inspired by this story? Do you want to tell it for the right reasons? Do you care about this character? How can you amplify their voice? If you've ticked all those boxes, great. Now you can think about ways to better understand the lives of your characters. Speak to people and listen to their stories. If you're drawn to directing because you like power and control and not because you're fascinated by people and how weird and wonderful everyone's life is, then don't direct. Full stop. Find another job. Do what other people with power complexes do and become a police officer. But if you are motivated by your love of people and figuring out what makes someone tick, you're great. All power to you. But also, on another note, not every story about women needs to be about misogyny. Same with other marginalised groups on screen. And even then, people still focus on white women in film when talking about misogyny, even when there are far more interesting characters in the story that have an entirely different experience of sexism because of the intersectionality with race. In Moxie, the main character is quite boring and doesn't even start this feminist magazine in the first place, yet the film is told through her perspective even though her friend is far more interesting and intelligent on the issues they talk about. But again, not every film about women or marginalised groups needs to be about this experience, but we also shouldn't feel like we can't talk about it. We should be allowed to share all kinds of stories. Write stories about anything and everything. Don't feel limited in what you can and cannot share. If you feel it deeply, share it with the world, because most likely there's someone who feels it too.
I saw her today at the reception.
A lot of what I've talked about today can be summarised by the expression, you can't destroy the master's house with the master's tools. Ultimately, Hollywood cares more about being perceived as doing the right thing rather than actually doing the right thing, and because of that, we won't see any real-world progress until they fund the right projects and work with the right people. And what do I mean by the right projects? I mean greenlight films about experiences that you don't understand. Greenlight films about experiences that make you uncomfortable. If you're making a film about these experiences and it doesn't make you uncomfortable, then you're doing something wrong. Don't try to make these stories palatable by diluting the message. It should be uncomfortable because it is. So let's carry on making stories that are actually empowering. More stories about the things that we don't understand. Don't avoid those stories and dismiss them. Embrace them. Be open-minded. And maybe we can change things for the better. I really think we can.
You might find you get what you need. We went down to the demonstration to get our fair share of abuse.
Yeah, it's really bad. It's really bad.
No, you're just tired. It's Thursday evening. I'm just stupid. No! Shit. I'm just shut up. I'm making a stupid essay that no one gives a fuck about. Shut the fuck up. I'm so mad at myself. Why? I shouldn't write about things that I'm passionate about because no one cares. What do you mean I have fucking followers on YouTube and people are commenting? Oh my god. These cookies are ruined! Why? They stuck to the tin. It's fine. Okay. Running up that hill.
Fuck, I left all your sound gear in my room.
Oh, I'll get it.
I don't know how to turn it off and stuff. How does it work?
It's fine. You were still recording?
No. No.